It's been a kind of banner year for me at events similar to this. So this group, I will say, I give you credit in how you've assembled this, because I fear some of what I'm saying will be a little too obvious to you, because in other instances, it's a bunch of entrepreneurs who are just saying, yeah, we're just going to go for it. And I think the healthy skepticism in the room is awesome, and forgive me if it's a little too obvious, but we'll see. Okay, so nonetheless, right, pretty straightforward. People still want to invoke, as we've heard in different ways today, innovation everywhere. And certainly the deference to new technology, I think, is fading. There are new concerns. I think there's some old responsibilities. And I think there's still this basic notion of how do you create value and maintain trust and success. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to go through some issues about how law and data-driven innovation intersect, and then do a couple deeper dives. Forget me, we already talked about it. All right, so one thing that comes out of certain literatures in business is the notion that businesses want to think about a triple bottom line. That it's not just profits, but actually, believe it or not, a fairly robust conversation about the notion of how what one does affects people and the planet. I'd like to suggest part of the reasons for this. Some really great work from a while ago now, 2004, talked about the idea of co-creation of value. That the firm is becoming a locus of value creation and value extraction. The question that we're seeing is, well, maybe that hasn't worked the way people hoped. In other words, people are voting with wallets. I think the last panel, the fact that the cities and larger governmental entities are using their market power to say, guess what? We actually want something different. Right there is a big deal. But absolutely, what's almost too obvious in the Bay Area, the way we make goods matter, right? It's going to influence the global marketplace. It has political implications. And now we're seeing some very active law and policy come out. But just as a side note, to remind everyone, we're seeing all sorts of fascinating questions in business in general, right? Food production, marriage equality, gun ownership. Delta got into a very interesting fight with the legislature in Georgia because it chose to suspend a very small subsidy to a few members of the NRA. And boy, for a pro-business state, there was a real back and forth there between the state willing to actually try and fight back, in a way, against corporations. Obviously, Uber, the whole delete Uber question, interesting questions about strikes. Facebook, as someone said today, almost unfortunately a continual case study in how perhaps not to run a corporation. Wells Fargo, let's not forget good old-fashioned, less obvious tech issues with, wow, we were incentivized, it seems, or if no one was at the wheel, and we're going to continually come up with fraud. Amazon UK, the question of taxation does matter, as was brought up, right? Are companies actually part of what's going on, and are they paying their fair share? More specifically, though, right? A frontier for both the intersection of legal, social, political, and commercial is data, privacy, and AI or ML. I want to do a little history. Remember why data? From my perspective, this goes back to early days of search and money. Some of you in the room remember these companies, right? Scale is expensive. Google studies a little company called Overture and realizes, hey, that text ad thing might work. They borrow it, shall we say? And all of a sudden, the mantra of, wow, with data I can generate money becomes a huge spillover, right? It's not just Silicon Valley. Every company out there starts to believe, with more data, I will find more and new things and I will monetize it. But I want to suggest that, as I think people in the room get, one problem, or at least a possibility that we're seeing, is that the overclaimed benefits of innovation, especially from this city across the Bay and all the way down to San Jose, which, by the way, when people talk about just bopping around the Bay Area, I mean, 50 miles, come on, it's far. It's empty, right? First of all, remember, the word innovation just means new. It does not mean good. That's it. It could be a big innovation, little innovation. It may or may not go anywhere. But again, there's all these recent examples. So Google at one level is an interesting study too, because one person put it to me this way. Look, if you want to do incredible innovation on a piece of software, And some of the back-end stuff, they're also still very, very good at that. But somehow they don't seem to always click on the full consumer side. But to be more specific, let's take a look at the Facebook mistakes in the last part of the year. Right? So it turns out they're sharing data with Spotify and Netflix. Now let's suppose I was the sort of person who takes pictures of my food. Now, I'll be honest, I haven't been on Facebook for about 2 years. But let's say I uploaded that. And it also was, oh, I happen to like Hip Hop Evolution, which as a side note, I highly recommend. Fantastic series. The problem is, what am I going to get? A recommendation for something I don't care about, Indian hip hop, right? It's just ridiculous. Your big innovation is, oh, yet another ad about something that you may or may not have cared about. And of course the answer is, if you gave us more data, we'd be even better at peering into your brain and we'd know what you want. Autonomous vehicles. Much higher stakes, right? Same problems. Who's got the data? Where are we monetizing? Who's running it? Is someone going to be recognized or not and run over? Melinda Gates, it helps to be a billionaire to be able to say this, but still, right? Let's do something more than just a new little app. Let's shoot for bigger innovation. The thing is, no matter what, we can still have a trust problem. So something that motivated me here, as was alluded to earlier today, the notion of algorithmic transparency. Many CS people I know were sort of in the, don't want to talk to you, you guys are idiots, I'm out of here. I was like, well, why? It's because of the talking past each other. Now, one thing that came up was something that mentioned, like, there's this thing where we're devoting ourselves, right? Oh my God, the temple of algorithms and software and data, wow. But it's on both sides. Because sometimes it's like a bad version of Star Wars. Help me, Obi-Wan, with your technology. Well, okay, but you just said technology is killing us. Pick one, maybe. Or realize it's not the technology. As Yvonne said, it's us. Nonetheless, if we start to be more skeptical and more honest about the technology, if we realize it is not dark magic, we might be able to start to say, well, what do we want? But in case someone in the room doesn't think that this is happening at scale across the country, right? The Privacy Project at the New York Times is very clearly saying what is going on, and people are starting to pay attention. As mentioned earlier, the GDPR, very strict about about data use in the EU. Sometimes I have heard people argue they're weak, they're obviously not innovative, it's a trade issue, they just don't like the way America wins. Problem. Hello, California yet again. The land of Silicon Valley has said no to data. Huh? Now think about it. They both have this big implication. So what's going on? What's often a counter argument? As we heard before, you're against innovation. Or the more subtle version, we increase consumer welfare. In other words, stuff will be cheaper. But will it? We don't know. Where's all the wealth going? If you're a company, you're also a little trapped now. Because here's what they've also been taught. You can maybe get away with all sorts of flaunting the law. You might get caught, right? Oxycontin. Maybe VW in Germany and other German automakers are a very good lesson, but maybe not. Because at the same time, with our own areas, right, in the tech world, Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, scooters, flaunting the law like crazy, getting to scale, and then someone tries to close the door and fix it. So if you're someone like even Marriott, you're actually thinking, I need to go head to head, but you don't know what to do. Because you're an old school company, you don't want to be that, but you also realize, wait, to get up there, I'm going to have to break things. So that's your current mindset. Evolve with data and technology or die. Right? By the way, if you go to the Google campus and see that T-Rex, the whole point of that is not we're scary. It's allegedly, just like a T-Rex, we could be evolved out of existence. Keep change going. But that's invaded everything, and maybe people need to go this way instead. Yes, evolve. Yes, compete. But build trust into what you do. So how does that work? All right, simple overview. There's a lot of stuff that does show that, in fact, Big data analytics, the precursor to really the underlying guts, perhaps, to a lot of the discussions now about software, algorithms, machine learning, et cetera, does work, right? There are really great things. Look, as much as we want to pick on these companies, perhaps, Google still really improves the amount of information we get, right? Facebook, for all of its issues, there's still lots of people who really are connecting to each other, albeit just simple things, right? Try and budge a family member off of Facebook. No, I get to see my grandkids and the dogs, and I'm happy. And I'm connected. I know what they're doing, right? So there's data security, there's privacy, and there's discrimination. Quick point on security. My colleague, Peter Swire, who, if you don't know, and if you're interested in security and privacy, is fantastic, a super expert. I like it. I don't know if he coined it, but the M&M, the hard and crunchy exterior, maybe that's a term of art. But you know, there are things you should be doing. And I think the folks at the cities and otherwise are getting this right. You know, you got to segregate. You got to know what's going on. You got to show me you've got real security. And look at the costs and benefits of, do you really need all that data all the time? So privacy's still out there doing a lot of work. We're going to have a whole bunch of issues with fair information practices and re-identification. So, interestingly, FIPS is born here in the US in the 70s. It's the Europeans who grab it and do more with it. Right? It's not that it went away, but they did. Now we've got this huge jump with the GDPR. Right? You can get fined for real. 4% of global revenues for any company, but certainly some of the big players, is a lot of money. Some have suggested that this could end up being the end of using data analytics as we know it. We'll see. As a more simple thing, suppose you do want to be global. What we do, it doesn't fit very well in that sense, right? We have to limit our collection. We have to be specific, and as we talked about today, that's tricky. Because guess what? If you want to be able to say, I only wanted my data used for XYZ, explain to me how, if I'm the company that had your data, that I don't super tag it so that I can then delete it. That's actually really tricky. And some of the best pieces of security that I'm aware of, called hashing and distributing means, and having redundancies in your data center, makes it extremely difficult to comply with delete all my data. Those two clash. And as much as I don't think it's fair to say the Europeans are all insane, I do think there's a lot of aspirations that run right into each other. And that's just how they play the game, by the way. And then they want to sort it out after the fact. Okay, so one of the classic retorts, though, it's anonymous. Okay, but maybe not. Right? There's the baseline. Remember, if you've actually got the obvious things, name, identity number, address, phone number, you're pretty much identifying. But can you de-identify? As some of you know, not so much. Very difficult, especially when you've got really cool large data sets. There have been pretty good papers out there that show the records, a medical records database, gender, date of birth, zip code. Seems anonymous. Turned out, no, we were able to figure you out. Another piece, short piece I wrote with a friend of mine, one of the great things about Georgia Tech, is I get to work with computer scientists who know way more than I, the unfrozen caveman lawyer. Right, so here's GDPR, legal gobbledygook, roughly, doesn't apply to anonymous information, and it's great. You can use it. Looks like a good carve-out, the sort of compromises maybe we were thinking of, for statistical or research purposes. More simply, okay, if you've got this aggregated data and it's not directly linked to identifying data, there's not a known systemic way to re-identify it, and it doesn't relate, you could be good to go. It seems then if, hey, I'm using it for statistical purposes, and I've got anonymity. Turns out we're not positive what that looks like under GDPR yet. But maybe, right, if we're in the game, we're going, whoa, 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 this is beautiful. I'm okay. I've got machine learning people. It is stats, and I can anonymize like crazy. It turns out what my colleague was pointed out, and why we wrote our short paper was, look, there's this thing called memoization. It's a caching mechanism, allows recall, and it turns out that what she was reminding everyone, and I helped hopefully put over the line, was this. Deep learning algorithms social security numbers, we can figure out stuff. And as I said before, early work shows that you can recommender systems leak information across users, and boom, we're through. We wrote this not as a got you. It was a warning that even in good faith within a discipline, especially one as varied in technique as machine learning, you could think you're doing okay and all of a sudden found out you've stepped on a mine. Or, to be differently, if you're working with a bunch of technologies, engineers, I'm innovative and I've got really cool math. My math proves everything. And what you need to do is say, oh, yes, it does. However, I need to know more. Okay, so again, probably super familiar to you, everyone. Good and bad discrimination, right? Efficient scoring. I don't think anyone in this room would actually say if we were running a bank, it's insane to try and figure out credit risk failure. The question is how, right? That's where it gets very tricky. Garbage in, garbage out. So how many people are aware of the whole story about Pothole app, Boston? Okay, so Boston had an app that was, again, super well-intentioned, will detect potholes. Now, unfortunately, and this is where I get a little upset with some of my colleagues in academia, there's two different ways the story has been told. One was, and then it turned out it only detected the rich white neighborhood, so obviously that was bad. Well, okay, the follow-up in I believe it was Kate Crawford's work, pointed out, and very quickly Boston figured that out. That's important. Boston was working with, I believe, Boston University and really good data science people. They visualized it, and it turns out really quickly, if you're not, remember where we started, going, yes, I bow down to the gods of technology and their apps. And we go, wait, let's put up a map. Let's use that data for us. And they go, hey, there's only potholes in the rich neighborhoods. Just say that out loud, right? It's one of the things I tell my students. When you want to make a really cool assertion, just say it out loud and double check, like, hey, does that sound right? I don't think so. And visualize it. And guess what? They very quickly are like, oh, well, it turns out that we had a couple problems. I believe one of them was manhole covers, because of the depression, looked like a pothole because it was a sensing device, right? So the app itself was getting kind of like, when you know where you are, well, it was picking up on the bounce. And then, yes, it turns out that people who lived in poor neighborhoods were not as likely to have the app or turn it on. But they actually quickly figured it out, as far as I know, and kept trying to improve. Now, we can say, hey, there's a surveillance issue, there's other issues, true. But the point is, you can get really stupid feedback loops if you don't understand the nature of your data and you don't continually audit and look at it. You cannot just defer to it. And that's why the point that was made by Yvonne really resonated with me, and I think I'm super impressed with the last panel. It's, you've got to keep doing your job. If you blame technology over and over, I think then you and I are to blame together. So how does that work? Test the outcomes, right? Inside the industry, or if you're buying software, say, I want to see this thing. And I want to have ways to double check what it's doing. Right? I think that is simply good business at this point. Don't just launch it. A lot of times what's probably happening is super cool lab innovations are being done. Someone puts out a paper, right? They go to things like, if you're familiar with NeurIPS and all these really fancy high-end machine learning conferences. Let's just call it that. If you don't know what it is, that's fine. But then the industry folks are sniffing around going, hey, what's the latest thing? And they buy it, right? That's what happened with, small group gets bought by Google for absurd money and then goes defeats Go. Sorry, redundant. Goes defeats goes. That's really poor English. Oh, well, moving on. Point is, maybe it wasn't ready for prime time. That was probably relatively benign. It's a game. But in other cases, maybe it should be, whoa. What we need to double check as industry is, what did the science paper say? And the science papers should hopefully be saying, well, we had a limited set of data. We were doing it for this context. But we're moving so fast, it's voice recognition everywhere. Someone might go, well, why, as people said. You can have internal ethics review boards. Why not? We've got cities organizing that where it's people who are doing it on volunteer time, I'm sorry, you're a $100 million or multi-billion-dollar company, can you not figure this out? Can you not pay someone internally? Now, let's be honest. It's easy to say, oh, that's easy to do. The flip side, having been inside a company, that's not a happy spot inside the company. It's really hard because you're now seen, as lawyers are always seen, and anyone who's saying no or let's stop and think, you are hurting the company and slowing down. It turns out, yes, we're slowing things down. But you use the cases that are out there now. There's a ton of them. Oh, would you really like to spend another year and a few $100 million on developing that product that was going to die within 24 hours of launch? Hello, Google Buzz. Right? You might get people to realize, no, it is actually us trying to build something so that everyone will win, including all the time and money you're spending. But it probably has to happen with good product counsel early. Someone who is part of the team, but just enough away to ask those weird questions. In specific cases, you want to double check, right? So if you're in a sensitive area, the law is actually saying, guess what? If you're doing lending, housing, employment, you have to pay attention. One of the weird things about a lot of companies, I will say, is they think that because they're cool and disruptive in their origins, that somehow doing something that has been around a long time, like lending, makes them new. And you have to actually go, well, actually, there's a law on this, it turns out. And while your technique is new, the notion of lending is not. One of the things that my colleague Josh Kroll and I put together then was the notion of technical accountability. Right? So a lot of people have done really good work about the problem of not having political accountability because these systems are hard to understand or they weren't built with input. But the other piece of this is maybe it turns out that if you start to build software from the beginning with an eye towards letting someone poke at it, it will actually be something that as a society we can say, good, go for it. And if there's a lawsuit, we'll be able to say, oh, did that work the way we hoped it would or not? Was there a design flaw? One of the big friction points right now, in other words, is the notion of algorithmic transparency is somewhat waved off, I think less so now, because computer scientists can say with truth and math, it turns out if you hand over code, you'll never be able to prove it never will do X or Y. This is how they look at the world. It took me a long time, but when I heard this from 5 or 6 different computer scientists, roughly it was, well, Deven, everyone knows in a complex system, and then at that point, I don't know what they were saying. But I actually wrote it down. And what they were really doing was quoting a thing or channeling a thing called Rice's theorem. But then I said, well, wait, you guys work with that problem. You can't tell me you're launching code from a really big company and you're not sure if it's going to work, right? Oh, no, we work within that all the time. Like, well, then what do you do? That's the moment where I urge you, if you want to be involved with policy, don't only go after them with pitchforks and knives. Listen to how they look at the world, because it turns out with most engineers in my experience, 2 tips. Get 2 of them in the room. If there's one, they'll say, you're dumb, possibly think you're an idiot, and you don't understand the math, why do I talk to you? If there's 2 of them, and you say, I don't know if I could do this, one of them will see it as, ooh, I can outdo that other engineer. Because that's the mindset. It's, I'm a problem solver. Set it up as a problem, not as a no. And explain what the coolness of solving the problem is. You're now in engineering land, and it's a good land. There's probably a deep reason why, Indians are like, you must be a doctor engineer. Well, guess what? If you've got a lot of people, you want to have health and you want to build things. It's a good civil profession. It's well-intentioned. Really, right? Put it together. Get your engineers, challenge them in a positive way. You usually get good outcomes in my experience. It may be they haven't thought of that before because, yes, there's a tunnel vision. Okay, break it. Now, the hard part is certain techniques, in fact, are not amenable to being understood. And then I have said in the paper with Josh, which upset some people, I don't think you get to use those for sensitive things. If you're determining who gets welfare rights or other things where we need due process, and you're telling me, but my deep learning system is so awesome, and it really was better. I was like, yeah, but maybe better here means I still don't get to use it. That's a social choice for us. It means that, in fact, we could have a world where fewer people get the obvious good benefit, but because we're choosing a other value of we need to be able to probe it for when it goes wrong, we go slower in how society moves forward. One of the things I proposed was a whistleblower statute, because it turns out if someone's actually building software with evil, nefarious intent, one of the best things you can do is have someone who says, hey, that was really bad. I've also proposed a public interest cause of action. So for things like autonomous vehicles and voting machines, maybe we have people out there probing systems as much as they can, kind of like a bug testing solution. And then they get to go, California is famous for this. Everyone, Prop 65, you've seen the signs, folks. That is actually, if I'm not mistaken, an early key tam law, which means if you as a citizen want to say this may have some problem, you can then get your own lab and you can go to the government and say, I believe you should go after this. They get a chance to decide if they want to take the case, and if they don't, then you bring your own case. We could start to do that for technology, I think. It's tricky. There's a lot of layers here in terms of making sure you don't have fraudulent cases, but certificates of merit, expert panels, it's possible. So here's the thing, which all of you are thinking about, I think. There, I did it again. Too many goes, too many things. Will we start to see a cutoff of data flows? Perhaps. There is genuinely a question about that happening under GDPR. In that sense, could it be that Europe will actually give up on what we take for granted? Maybe. But the national privacy law question is fascinating. Will it have less teeth than California? History of political maneuvering, likely, but not 100% clear to me which way that's going to break. And either way, it might still slow things down or change up the game. In short, I think the deference to industry is ending. We do need trusted systems. I think industry should take the lead and start to build this way, because that would actually show genuine, deep, good faith. They can understand the problem ex ante, get out there ahead of it, test it, show that they tested. There'll still be mistakes. And the government might start to pass even more laws to make sure bad actors are discovered and prosecuted. Now, here's the thing. Does that mean innovation's over? No. Because if it's a law for everyone, guess what? Everyone now gets to innovate on being more trustworthy, on building software that we can actually play with in a way that matters. And it turns out there's a technique called zero knowledge proofs that my colleague, again, it's great to work with CS people who know what they're doing. It's a theory, but it might be that you could build software in such a way that if we, outside of computer science, are saying, we want the software to work within certain parameters. What engineers want is a clear specification, and that's why fairness has so much trouble. Good luck defining that in a way that works for an engineer. It's not going to happen. But if you have a clear specification, they'll say, great, I'll build to that. And it turns out there are techniques that say, I can even prove to a third party, here's the punchline, without giving away the secret sauce. You don't necessarily have to hand over code in a zero knowledge proof. If this holds up, this could be very promising, right? So much to make that work. This is not pie in the sky, folks. For things that are already out there, as far as I know, not going to work easily. New software, however, could be built with this in mind to say, great, I can prove to you, you can have a third party who can poke at it and say, yep, they did what we were asked them to do. Doesn't mean it will not do things we didn't want. Doesn't mean as a society we'll still not be upset, but it means we can at least start to say, hey, did you do certain things a certain way? Oh, yeah. In simplest terms, something I wrote in 2008 and then published in 2009, having to do with early versions of embedded medical devices, I think it's still right. The notion of co-creation of value is this. Stop treating people as a resource. Stop saying you signed the contract and we can do what we want. It's an error. These are the practices where all of a sudden, and it doesn't matter, by the way, government, university researchers, industries, everyone can actually start to give trust that science and industry is in fact doing progress for all instead of progress for a small group. And with that, I'm done. Questions? That was 62 slides, and we still have 20 minutes before drinking.
Thank you for your talk.
Please.
I learned a lot, and you were really fun, so that was great. For you, what would your ideal definition of transparency be? Because I think a lot of people have a kind of a fear around tech, and what some engineers might consider transparency, no one knows what they're saying.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's the same problem as fairness in a way, because I haven't been able to get my arms around what would be properly transparent, to your point. I think engineers have some really good ideas. My bet is, from a legal perspective, what motivated one of the papers was this. Lawyers love to believe that engineers are building this building, that you built it, you must have a blueprint, we can look at it, and we can all understand it. And then I talked to people who are doing really cool computer science, and they're like, no, in good faith, we're not positive how that works and how it came out the other end. And so I don't know what transparency in that world. I mean, if you've got that background, I would love to know what you think, frankly, because I think one level would be, that's why the third-party testing is promising if it works. It's a little bit of, so data, one of the things people are looking at is, think of your whole pipeline of what you did, right? The data, where it came from, dare I say harvested? I'm kidding, no. Where it was collected, the provenance in that sense. If you start to label it, I think at every stage where there's a major possible question, the more you can show that, you've got a step towards a type of transparency. Whether you can hand that over, well, that is a secret sauce problem.
Question. Yes, I'm a computer scientist. And a little bit of transparency comes to, well, I put the code open source. There you go.
Right.
There's all, 1,000 lines of P Latin that, who's going to make sense of that. So,
right.
Yeah, I'm transparent, so I don't, it's okay. And by the way, if something goes wrong, it's the algorithm, not to be held accountable.
Right. Right. No, I think that was another motivator, was there's some interesting literature out there about open source can do a lot, but it won't necessarily solve some of the current legitimate questions that are happening about the nature of transparency, right? So yes, hey, just be transparent. And it's like, again, is that really going to get you anything? It would be like it's a bad fig leaf, right? It's, oh yes, I handed it off. You have no idea what I did anyway.
I'll offer something on the transparency side. Some work that I know from some colleagues that I used to work with at Google, a paper fairly recently called Model Cards for Model Reporting. So that's one possible example where it's really about how you recommendations for how you really specify what your model does, when it should be used, what it should not be used for, properties, so that there's more transparency about the models that.
That's a great point. I'd heard about this. I'd forgotten the name of that, but they are trying to work on that. I think, again, the context as an example, I think it's Richard Karun, I believe is his name. Really great stuff. And I was at this conference where I was like, oh, wow. He said, you could use this sort of opaque machine learning technique, but it turns out that when he reduced it to basically, forgive me if I'm getting it wrong, and if Richard sees this, my apologies, but a type of decision tree which was really easy to understand. But then I shared it with other people, and they're like, yeah, but that's only 30 features, right? And so what they were trying to say to me is, look, context matters. In the health context where he was doing that, you didn't need as many features. But Google ads, Facebook news, all those, the number of things that are behind those, it's, the phrase 200 to 300 signals at least, it's like, that's not going to work according to some people. Maybe I'm wrong, but the model cards is an interesting way to say, look, we can actually give you pretty high confidence about what we're doing, how we're building it, and what's happening. So thank you. I need to actually get to, there's always that question of do your homework and do your reading.
Are there more questions? There more questions?
I have a question about the interaction with European law. Earlier today, we heard a little bit about data localization efforts, and they were presented as a problem.
Yeah.
And they definitely are a problem when it's a country like China wanting to localize the data within its borders in order to, keep even closer track of its citizens. But in European countries, it was a way for those citizens to say, we don't want all the data to be collected and stored in the U.S.
Correct.
And there is a sense in which I wonder sometimes if we realize how it feels to other countries when we confidently say that it should all be interoperable and all sort of inuring to our benefit in the US.
Yeah, that's great. So a few things there. I think it was Chris's talk that noted that for a quick second. This is another moment where I get to celebrate one of my good friends and colleagues. Peter Swire's work, he's got a whole group, there's a few other people who also do this, on cross-border data. If you could type Peter Swire cross-border data, there's a whole web page on this. I've had the privilege to work with him a little. I actually wrote a quick paper in the Communications ACM right when I left Google about this question, and I said, companies can no longer stick their head in what I call the data sand, because it used to be, my servers are in Ireland, so I'm governed by Ireland and good luck. And I was like, yeah, I don't think that's going to hold up much longer, and it turned out very quickly people were saying that. The hard part here is Europe is a really big market, so if a bunch of companies want to comply and put stuff within Europe, and in fact, it turns out when you're doing distributed computing, which is another way of saying cloud stuff, for both security and other reasons, that'll work. Put servers all over, manage it like an energy grid, actually, and you're within the EU, you're good to go, relatively. Small countries would pose an interesting question here, too, right? So now, if you want to do data localization in, say, Vietnam or Ecuador, how does that work? Maybe a few big players can afford that, too, but there's some trade-offs there. But then the third piece that you got to that Peter illustrates, I think, really nicely is imagine you're in the police department in Paris, and there's been a serious enough crime that you find out that this person had email that was served by a US company. Well, our current system is called the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty, and I did this when I was in practice. That thing is not designed for today. That's for really big crime. It's where you go through embassies, and it takes, oh gosh, I mean, it can be 6 months to, I think maybe higher average was a year or more. That's not tenable with the amount of actual evidence that a local government has genuine claim to. A little bit of, I think, your wavelength there. So what Peter's working on, and I hope the project continues, is, frankly, it's probably scary to folks, but it's a way to say, what does process look like in a given country? Does it map what we would want here to actually allow our companies to comply with the request for data? Now, of course, people get nervous with that, right? Because what's the country asking? But there is a way to make this work. And I think this is a different tack on your gut point, which is there's a legitimate need to get access to that data for a whole bunch of reasons. It could be to fight literally good old-fashioned crime. And if I'm in France, I might be like, what do you mean you can't go after these folks? You've got the evidence. No, it's stuck somewhere in Mountain View or Kirkland or whatever. So there's a lot of layers to what's going on with GDPR. Interestingly, my impression is other countries are following that lead. Whether anything would happen with China, I don't know, but I doubt it, right? I mean, that's a whole other game. And so the Mozilla normal mantra is most likely going to be, we're about openness, and we don't like data localization, so stop it. But I think if he were here, he might say, yeah, but of course there's a problem with what does that mean in Russia versus China? But I don't know. I don't want to speak for Chris. But it gets really weird, but I think subset internets are likely in the future, is my bet. Yeah.
I absolutely love your talk talking about accountability. It's the question I wanted to ask the last panel. My question is around efficiency, right? So I'm an engineering designer, previous life, Politico, and then now I work in the space of emerging tech, automated virtual reality, AI. And my question has to do with what's the one thing that you can anticipate for to make things as fast as possible when I think about surveillance and the ban on facial recognition. I mean, it's 2019, the iPhone's been around since 2004. That's about 15 years for just one single mobile device. And Apple glasses, AR glasses, just got announced, as well as Facebook. So I'm anticipating an IoT, wearables, sensors. What should we be preparing for? Because I feel like, as much as it's really great that San Francisco and Oakland have been taking the lead in the country, knowing that San Francisco is at the forefront of progressivism and of innovation, I feel like, wow, we're really moving slow and very much behind, because this is like many, many years late as we're anticipating other platforms being developed. What's the most effective thing that you could say for any engineers in the room that they should be building across, like, I guess, coalitions and conversations between companies and working groups, and as well as with government? Because I feel like this is really great that we're doing this now, but it's really, really late and kind of slow, to be honest.
Well, I think part of what I would say is, yes, you're correct. And I'm going to actually defend the engineers at this point, because think back to what it looked like 15 years ago. The ability for this to all of a sudden turn into these very different applications was not really an inkling, maybe. And I think this is going to be the most interesting moment for the profession, right? The IEEE, I was part of one of their first major new statements on ethics. And I think that's getting much more crisp. The explosion of ethics courses in engineering programs this year, I think someone did a quick review, and it might be more than 150, 200 different syllabi. Work like what's going on at Santa Clara. So that's step one, getting engineers to think in those terms. But again, I really hope we don't get smug about put yourself inside the company. It's hard, as you point out, to slow down things when you're told, build this thing, right? So it's almost too easy to say, the Manhattan Project. I don't want to do that, in hindsight, right? But the thing is, this doesn't feel like, wow, what energy did I just unleash? So I would imagine if I were an engineer, I'd be whiplashed, in the sense of, at one level, I want to stop and slow down and really be thoughtful. At another level, is it really going to be that big? And another level, my boss started wondering why I haven't finished writing my code, or my team, right? So that's where maybe part of the structures are inside the company, right? The higher level review boards, the people who are embedded with the team. It's up to the people. It really is. Look, not to end on a downer, we're human beings. We're broken from the beginning. It's really hard to do the right thing all the time, let alone figure out what that is. But not asking the question, not continually trying to get the question somehow right, is probably the bigger mistake, in my opinion. I'll tell you honestly, that dates back to a Heideggerian thing that I picked up at Berkeley, but that's the basic question. Why must I be? That was this professor who I used to drive my actually CS roommate crazy. Just pacing around the house. What is that? What is it to be me in this world as an engineer, as a person? How am I doing something? Is there a moment where if I'm an engineer like you can start to see some of the horizon of the application and say, is that where it's headed? Is there something I can do? Can I raise a flag? Side note to junior engineers especially, do not buy into the lifestyle. Keep a cash reserve, because if you really, really don't think your company's doing right, noisy exit is real. Walk out. But if you've got a cash in the bank to have a few months' rent and to be able to find that new job in the interim, you could get people to go with you. Right now, engineers should have a lot of power in this part of the country because there's an absolute lack of labor talent, allegedly. If that's true, that's why labor can organize right now at big companies. But then doing it in a way that's really thoughtful. What does that look like? Are you really saying, well, it has to look like this political outcome or that political outcome? That, I don't know. Like, I'll give you an example from search. When Google started to hand-tune search, boy, they made a mistake from one perspective, which was now everyone says we know what the outcome of search should be. But those of you who do computer science and think about the nature of information provision, I don't know what exactly could come out. I know that there are things that are hateful that I don't want there. But that's not the same as saying I know what search should look like, right? And think about it. On a political spectrum, there's things in the middle where people truly disagree. Does that mean they don't get to see the people with whom they agree because some people don't like them? I thank God I'm not the one making that decision. But those are really weird questions. But those are the good ones for engineers to have. And to say maybe we don't hide behind free speech at every moment. because it's a nifty move. But think about it. If we ask Twitter or someone to start to control that stream, we've now handed off a huge political thing to a private entity. We don't have a good answer here, right? So this is where the big questions, and this is where, Rachel, forgive me, we're going way off here, but the door is open. Okay, so how many people think we should break up the big tech companies? Okay, that's fine. What do you think you'll get out of that? Other than, wow, we broke them up because they're big and powerful.
It's not even mean to break them up.
Excuse me?
Why does it mean you take all of the alphabet and have a million? But I have no idea.
So that's a great point, right? So in the best deference to this is a good traditional move in antitrust, right? Ma Bell, good old AT&T, broken up, and we did get interesting competition, regional. Of course, what happened in the long run? We now have a few big players again. Whether that's the nature of certain industries, I leave to others, but you can guess that I'm thinking, yeah, maybe. But in tech, would you have multiple search engines? Guess what? We do. Would you have more than one Facebook? Explain how the network effects work. Google has been trying to build a social network for more than 10 years. They have the money, they have the skills, no one's moving.
Facebook is 3 networks.
Thank you. Good point. So you could try and split them, but to what end? Here's my counterpunch to break them up. We used to have a thing in this country where we would be able to tell, all right, for all of us old folks in the room, there were 3 networks plus PBS. Call it 4. And what used to happen as a kid? I want my cartoons. No, I had to watch all the conventions for both parties and the debates and all the way through the political, because that was their job. And we had a doctrine that said you have to do that because you have the great privilege of reaching the American people. Once we got cable, once we got abundance and the end of what was scarcity of spectrum, that went away. What we might be seeing is a different way of talking about power concentration. What people point out, do we want to treat these companies as a public utility? But think about that. That would then mean Facebook gets to be the social network, roughly speaking. Google gets to be the search engine. I've also written about this. It's a trade-off. And then there's that moment. This is what I meant by, I get really frustrated by, all tech bad, look at them. Oh, no, save us. Well, which is it? Which do you want? Because we could do it, right? Monopolies in big verticals, they'll make a ton of money. They don't want this, by the way, because in the long run, that makes them a utility. But maybe they're fine, right? Google's pretty clever. They're basically throwing off all that public utility style money to all the other alphabet companies. Very clever move, right? Because now you can say, these are the companies doing the things that we're not sure whether they'll become huge, but the main company is doing just fine. And the stock market gets much happier when that happens, it seems, right? But do we really want that? Do we want, or if de facto that's that, maybe we bite the bullet and say, great, here are your rules. Then we're back to, what do those rules look like? Are we really going to let politicians decide? And remember, whichever party you like isn't always in power. And there's a long history when we had those 3 of a lot of mischief about what it meant to carry certain things under the old system of the 3 networks. So when people are really excited for breaking up things, et cetera, it's like, oh, yeah, that felt good. And I think the better question was, to what end? What do you get out of that?
So this
Time for us to go drink. Sorry.
It's a very interesting topic of discussion that we can continue over drinks and appetizers, because we're now at time. But thank you very much.
I want 2 seconds. This is for our organizers. Thank you for getting this to work.